Let me take you to the edge of a tarmac, where a woman in a wrinkled uniform stood taller than the man who tried to humiliate her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw a punch. But what she did next shook the courtroom and the country. This isn't just a case about abuse of power. It's about what happens when the quietest person in the room refuses to stay silent. Ready? Good. Let's begin. 7:40 p.m. The edge of dusk cast long, metallic shadows across Skybridge International Airport. The overhead PA echoed, delayed flights, final calls, the rhythmic clatter of luggage carts trailing like tired footsteps. A breeze swept across the tarmac, thin but sharp, carrying the weight of a long day. Sienna Kwan stepped out from the service door of Alaska Flight 908. Her Navy uniform bore the creases of an emergency shift. Oxygen failure mid-air, 163 lives rerouted through her voice, her hands. Around her neck, a deep blue silk scarf fluttered gently, marked with the insignia of in-flight medical command. She was tired, yes, but upright. She gave a quiet nod to a ground staffer near the cargo lift. He nodded back, but didn't speak. It was the kind of silence reserved for professionals who'd seen too much and still showed up the next day. That's when he appeared. LT, Charles R. Maddox stepped out from behind a patrol SUV, his silhouette cutting across the orange light. He raised a hand, not in greeting but command. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." Sienna paused, unsure. "I'm with Alaska Air, emergency medical dispatch. Just finished flight 908. He didn't care. "Yeah, I see the uniform. You people wear that like it makes you immune to rules." Sienna reached for her ID badge, calm. "I'd like to call my supervisor. No calls," Maddox snapped. "You're a problem in heels, and problems don't go home tonight." Without further warning, the cuffs clicked. A faint metallic clatter echoed louder than the wind. Nearby, a technician in a neon vest froze mid-step. A few passengers from 908, still holding their carry-ons, watched from the corner of the lot. Phones rose. One hand, painted with chipped green polish, pressed "Go Live." Sienna didn't cry out. She didn't flinch. She stared, not in defiance, but in disbelief. Her breath caught somewhere between fury and grief. When Maddox shoved her toward the cruiser, she tightened her fist, not from pain, from restraint, like she was holding back the collapse of something precious, something they weren't allowed to take. Maddox glanced toward the cameras, smirked. But for half a second, just long enough for the lens to catch, his hand trembled. By morning, the Jefferson County Courthouse was blanketed in a sea of press badges, tangled cords, and boom mics. National anchors jockeyed for angles. CNN, Channel 8, dozens of local feeds, everyone was here. The video of Sienna Kwan's arrest had exploded overnight. 1.2 million views in 12 hours. America wasn't just watching, it was waiting. Lexi Navarro stood just beyond the courthouse steps, holding her phone steady, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke into the live stream. "We're not just watching one woman walk into court today," she said. "We're watching how power responds to a woman it didn't expect to stand back up." The glass doors opened. Sienna appeared, still in navy, her scarf tied neatly again at her throat. No wave, no statement. She moved with a stillness that made the crowd hush without being asked. In her right hand, a gold envelope. It caught the light as she passed, like a sealed truth waiting for permission to be opened. As she walked the short stretch toward the courtroom entrance, a few bystanders removed their hats. No one told them to. It was instinct, like witnessing something sacred, unscripted. Inside, Isabel Park stepped from the shadows of the corridor, buttoning her jacket with one hand. Gray blazer, low ponytail, no jewelry. Her eyes locked onto Sienna's with quiet conviction. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. We fight on your terms. In the courtroom, tension clung to the walls. Judge Everett Langdon entered, stoic, methodical. But when his eyes settled on Maddox at the defense table, there was the faintest flicker of tension. Then his gaze shifted to Sienna. No smile, no welcome. Just a pause. Subtle, thoughtful. The camera caught it, and live stream comments flared. "Did you see that? He's unsure? Langdon's reading the room. This isn't routine." Sienna exhaled twice before sitting down, not loudly, just enough to still her ribs. Isabel gave her a soft glance. Not pity, not reassurance. A vow. Online the comments rolled in. She didn't need a speech, her walk said everything. When she held that envelope, I swear the whole country leaned in. She's not here to win, she's here to matter. The courtroom felt too still, packed with onlookers, yet not a soul shifted as the bailiff called the next witness. Cameras panned slowly, stopping at the witness stand where Illit Charles Maddox adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform. He looked sharp, official, but beneath the surface, arrogance coiled like smoke. His smirk wasn't big, just tight enough to suggest he thought the next hour would go his way. Isabel Park stood, calm as ever. "Lieutenant Maddox," she began, voice steady, "can you explain the reason you arrested Ms. Kwan on the night of April 4th? He glanced at Sienna and smiled. She thought a silk scarf gave her authority. Flight attendants like her, they pour drinks, they don't give orders. A few chuckles slipped from the back row. But they died quickly. No one laughed long, not after the camera zoomed in on Sienna's face. Still, expressionless, yet somehow fierce in its composure. She didn't blink, didn't even flinch. Lexi Navarro, live streaming from her front row seat, updated her caption mid-sentence. He really said that, on record, before the entire country. Isabel's gaze didn't leave Maddox, but her hand shifted to the table beside her. "Let's play the body cam footage," she said. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen came alive. Maddox approached, his voice, the tension. Then, black. 4 full minutes of static. The courtroom murmured. Isabel turned to the police representative. "Technical failure," the officer mumbled. "Corrupted file." The murmur sharpened. Lexi whispered into her phone. "And yet, somehow, it's always the women in uniform whose footage disappears." From the gallery, a voice rose. "Permission to speak?" Dean Carruthers stepped forward, removing his hard hat as he addressed the court. "I'm Dean, ground operations engineer. I watched her take command of a failing cabin and save 163 lives. Without her, Alaska 908 would have been a headline, a body count." Sienna's eyes glistened. She didn't cry, but for the first time she looked down, just briefly, like a burden had shifted an inch. Maddox's jaw twitched, his hands clenched tight in his lap. Judge Langdon tapped his fingers on the bench. Once, twice, the rhythm of doubt. And outside the courtroom, social feeds exploded. If this is how we treat our heroes, what hope do we have? That scarf saved lives. His badge erased footage. The courtroom barely breathed as Isabel Park stood, her presence cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Your Honor," she said, lifting a folder with precision, "I present 4 internal complaints filed against Lieutenant Maddox over the past 6 years, each involving harassment of female personnel in aviation and emergency services." Murmurs rippled, eyes shifted from Maddox to Isabel, back to the judge. Judge Langdon leaned forward, brow furrowed. "This is not a trial about character," he said, voice clipped. "We're not here to litigate morality." Isabel didn't flinch. She simply placed the file on the evidence table. "Not morality, Your Honor. Pattern." The courtroom felt like it had stopped breathing. Even Lexi Navarro, broadcasting from the gallery, whispered into her mic. "Langdon looks torn. You can see it, he's wrestling with the weight of what this is becoming." Sienna sat still, but her hand rose briefly to the corner of her scarf. Just a slight adjustment. The camera zoomed in. Screenshots flooded Twitter within seconds. And then, a click of the rear courtroom doors. A tall black man in a tailored blue suit walked in, steady and unreadable. He said only 5 words. "Special Agent Malik Rhodes, FBI." He didn't bow, didn't pause, didn't raise his voice. He walked to the bench and placed a thick red folder in front of Langdon. Federal directive to open an investigation into coordinated concealment of misconduct files involving law enforcement personnel. Langdon opened the folder. The first page hit like a freight train. A printout of an internal group email from Maddox. These stewardesses think badges give them power. Let's see how fast they strip the uniform when we're done. The judge's face turned pale. His hands trembled as he turned to the second page. Lexi whispered, "That's the knockout punch. It's over. Hashtag wings don't lie." It exploded online, screens lighting up like wildfire. Someone in the back shouted, "Is this a courtroom or a cover-up factory?" Sienna's gaze drifted to Isabel. No words, just gratitude, quiet and fierce. Isabel met her eyes, one subtle nod. This was the beginning of the end. Langdon leaned back, defeated by something no gavel could silence. The truth, when finally spoken, didn't need to shout. It only had to land. The courthouse steps were flooded before sunrise. News vans packed the sidewalks, their antennas rising like spears into a gray California morning. Barricades lined the entrance. Officers held back a crowd that had doubled overnight. Inside, the Jefferson County Courthouse pulsed like the heart of a nation bracing for something more than justice. It braced for truth. Lexi Navarro tapped "Go Live" from her press seat, her voice low, reverent. Today, she whispered to over 2 million viewers, truth finally speaks its name. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The hum of anticipation dulled to silence as Teresa Duval, FAA Regional Director, took the stand. Her heels clicked with deliberate weight. She didn't blink under the lights. "We confirm," she said, voice steady, that lead flight attendant Sienna Kwan was authorized to assume command under Section 8.34 of the International Civil Aviation Emergency Directive. Her actions during Flight 908 were by the book, and likely life-saving. No gasp, no applause, just silence, a reverent pause. Maddox's jaw flexed, his hand gripping the wooden rail like it might hold him upright. Sienna bowed her head, not in submission, but in tribute. A nod to every soul she'd ever steadied at 30,000 feet. And then, the screens flickered. Lexi's voice guided the room. What he said, you need to hear it. On cue, the courtroom projector displayed a leaked email from Maddox. "These scarf-wearing princesses think they run the place. One day, they'll rip those things off in shame." The LED wall lit up. So did the country. Wings don't lie. Within 20 minutes, 3 million shares, a digital thunderclap. Judge Langdon leaned forward, his voice cracked not from age but weight. "This court is transferring to federal criminal proceedings. At Charles Maddox, you are remanded for obstruction of justice and abuse of federal authority." Maddox shot up, voice ragged with fury. "I'm a lieutenant. I protect this country." Malik Rhodes stepped forward, unbothered, cuffs in hand. "Then you should have protected its laws." The click of the handcuffs was louder than any gavel. Tears fell, from the gallery, from the passengers of Alaska 908. One man wept openly, voice breaking. "She saved my life. And now, she saved justice." Sienna didn't cry. She bowed her head just once. And in that gesture, the silence roared. The doors of the courthouse swung open to a wall of cameras. Microphones tilted like sunflowers in bloom, chasing her every move. Reporters shouted questions that Sienna Kwan never acknowledged. She walked slowly, steadily, eyes forward, the wind nudging the deep blue scarf at her throat. Lexi Navarro didn't speak. She let her live stream roll silently, framing Sienna's every step like a final frame in history. The crowd parted without being asked. Some held up phones, some simply watched, hand over heart. Sienna stopped midway down the courthouse steps. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Instead, she reached up and adjusted her scarf, just slightly, just enough to make it sit straight across her collarbone. Nothing more. But in that moment, the internet ignited. Comments poured in by the second. "She didn't speak, but we heard everything. That scarf is a flag for everyone who's ever been silenced. I'm a flight attendant too. Today, I walked into my terminal with my shoulders back. Lexi ended the stream, her voice cracking around the words. She didn't need to win, she just needed to remain whole. The aftermath moved faster than headlines could keep up. Maddox was hit with 11 reopened investigations, harassment, abuse of power, evidence tampering. His badge was pulled, his name scrubbed from department websites. The FAA launched a national initiative, Safe Wings, focused on legal protection and institutional reform for airline employees, especially women in uniform. Isabel Park was nominated to the Federal Board on Occupational Justice Reform. She accepted in silence, but her statement went viral. "My job isn't to speak louder, it's to make sure others are finally heard." A clip went viral days later. A 7-year-old Asian girl stood beside her mother outside LAX. She wore a toy flight attendant pin. Into the mic, she whispered, "I want to be like Miss Sienna, not loud, but never small." And as the credits of Real Life rolled, the camera pulled back one final time. Sienna still stood there on the steps, scarf catching the breeze, not in defiance, but in grace. Not like a banner waved in triumph, but like a truth returned to where it always belonged. Fade to black. Then words in quiet white. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who just saved it. Sometimes the strongest voices aren't the ones that shout, they're the ones that simply refuse to disappear. In a world where power often speaks the loudest, dignity whispers the truth. And when truth stands its ground, even silence becomes a force no one can ignore. Justice, after all, doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives in stillness and stays. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of what's worth standing for, leave a comment below. And if you haven't yet, follow the channel, subscribe, and stay with us. More stories are waiting.